In this video, we'll build a complete modern responsive website design. Alright, so before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank you guys for liking the video I put out just the other week. For this video, I'm setting a goal of 600 likes, so please remember to like this video, and if you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on your notifications. So before we check out the files that I'm going to provide you with to build the website design, let's take a look at how the website looks at its full width for desktop and laptops, and then we'll take a look at the mobile version on the right. So at the top of the website, we have our gradient landing page header section with the titles on top of it, as well as the icons. Then beneath that, we have our navigation bar, which will take on the same gradient styling. And on the mobile version, it's going to turn into the drop-down menu. And the navigation menu will also be sticky. So when we scroll down the page, no matter if we're on the full width version or the mobile version, the navigation is going to stick to the top. And we're also going to add this nice little shadow underneath the navigation, which looks nice as we're scrolling down the page. Then the first section underneath the navigation will be this title where it says, "Let's build it." And we're going to add these cool asterisk icons off to the sides of our titles, in addition to the border or underline that you see underneath them. And then underneath that, we'll have our 3-column section here where we have the heading, image, paragraph, and then the buttons underneath them. And as you'll see on the mobile version of the website, it's going to transform into the single column layout. And underneath that, we'll have the mobile-friendly fixed image background section where we have that fixed image with the scrolling window as we move down the website. Then that will be followed with an asterisk heading with the underline, and then a 2-column section that we see with the See the Collection heading text button, and then the image on the right. Then at the very bottom of the website, we're going to have another gradient section with our 3-column footer layout, including the social media icons that you see here, as well as links that you can put to different pages of your website, and then a phone number and email address. And when we click on the phone number or the email address, it's going to prompt us to make a call or send an email depending on what device you're on. So now that we've gotten a feel for the full width version of the website, let's take a look at how the different sections of the website will respond to different device widths. So let's go back up to the top of the page, and I'm going to flex the window up to a wider version and then flex it back down so you can see how it's going to transition and transform as the window resizes. So you'll notice at the top of the website, the headings, the icons, and the navigation will all transform as we flex the window down. So the navigation is going to go into a narrower set width, and then underneath 992 pixels, it's going to transform into the mobile drop-down version. And you'll also notice that when the icons above the navigation resize or reshape, they're going to maintain a narrow width. And we're going to do that by using different column widths as we flex the window down. Then scrolling down the page, our heading is going to resize, but you'll notice that the 3-column section will as well. So when we get to the 992 pixel mark, it's going to transform into the single column layout. And when we get down underneath 576 pixels in width, it'll turn into a fluid design, as you can see when the screen width gets really narrow. You'll also notice that underneath the 3-column section, we'll have the fixed image background section, and that window is going to get smaller as we shrink the website down, but I'm going to show you how to make that window a little bit taller on the mobile version because it's kind of narrow here, as you can see. Then underneath that, we have the 2-column section, which will size down into the single column layout at 992 pixels as well. And the same will be true for the 3-column footer layout, as you can see here, going from the 3-column layout to the single column layout. Okay, so now that we've looked at the desktop version of the website as well as the mobile version and how it's going to respond to different device widths, let's check out what we'll need to get started with the tutorial. So in the description of this video will be the starter files for this website project which I've prepared that include all of the images and files to build the website. And the first thing that you'll notice when you download the tutorial starter files will be this file right here called 12 Website Bundle. So to support my channel, be sure to check out the 12 website bundle pack that this is a preview for by clicking on the image to go to my website or the 12 website bundle pack button. That way you can check out all of the complete website designs as well as the bonuses that are included in the bundle. And the gradient design that we'll be building today is most like the navigation from the parallax and canvas design, as well as the header with the sticky navigation in the resume design. So be sure to check those out. Moving back to the tutorial starter files that are in the video description, I'm going to be using the text editor Visual Studio Code that you see in the background, and this is widely regarded as the best free text editor that you can use to build and code websites. And in just a moment, I'll go over what's included for us inside of index.html and style.css from the download. But first, if you're new to the Visual Studio Code text editor, you can go over to my website. And this isn't the file included in the bundle pack. This is my actual website here at w3newbie.com. And then go over to the resources page. You'll see on the sidebar to the left that I have a lesson on the Visual Studio Code text editor. And from here, you can get a link to download Visual Studio Code as well as the shortcuts, then see and learn about how to install the two extensions that I use, the first of which is for the colors that I use, and then the second is the live server extension that we'll be using. Also the Emmet shortcuts, which I'll cover briefly in just a couple minutes when we get started. Then the VS Code video on my website will also show you how to import all of the settings down here into Visual Studio Code so you can use it just as I do in the video. So back over in Visual Studio Code, I'm going to turn on the live server by just hitting the button in the lower right-hand corner where it says port 5500, and I'll just dispose of the previous live server session and then hit go live, and as you'll see, it's going to open up in Chrome with a blank page. Then to see that we're connected to Chrome, we can just type in any information. So I'll just add a heading 1 and inside of that write test, exclamation point. And when I save it, there you see the test text up there. And you can set your preference to save automatically, but I prefer to save it manually, and I think it makes for a better learning experience when I can control that here in the video. So I'll leave that up to you in the Visual Studio Code settings. Then the last thing that we'll cover here before we get started with going over the tutorial starter files will be a brief introduction to Bootstrap in case anyone watching isn't familiar with it. So Bootstrap is the CSS framework that we're going to be using, as well as JavaScript features such as the Dropdown menu to lay out our website. So with Bootstrap, we can add HTML classes to our code that already have style added to them. So if we just add text-center here and save it, you'll see that the text is now going to be centered on the page. So any class that we use from Bootstrap, what you could do is go over to the bootstrap.css file and hit Command F, which is the find feature here in Visual Studio Code, and I'll just type in text-center. Then you'll see the style for that class show up, as you can see here, where it says text align center. So you can always do that if you want to learn more about the CSS styling attached to a Bootstrap class, but we're actually going to use the bootstrap min.css file inside of our actual website because it takes up a little bit less space, and that means less time for the website to load. One other resource you might consider checking out is the Introduction to the Bootstrap Grid System Layout lesson on the resources page on my website. You can check that out for an introduction to the 12-column grid system. You can also check out the courses that I have building complete Bootstrap websites on the courses page as well. And then further down this page, you'll see that there's a link to the Bootstrap documentation. So we'll make a few references to the Bootstrap documentation as we're building the website. But if you want to learn more about the layout itself and the grid system, you can go to this link here for the Bootstrap grid, but we'll cover that briefly as we're laying out the website as well. Now let's get an overview of all that's already included for us inside of the tutorial starter files. So make sure that you have index.html and style.css open in the text editor. And from the top of index.html, we'll have our HTML5 doc type, followed by the HTML tag with language English included in it for us. And then inside of the head section, which will tell the web browser all of the important information for how we want the website to display, we'll have the meta tag charset UTF-8, which is the standard character set for letters and numbers on the internet. Then we have the with device with initial scale 1 meta tag for mobile devices, followed by the Internet Explorer and Microsoft Edge compatibility meta tag, and then our title and fave icon for the website. And if you want to see where those will be located, if we just look to Google Chrome and bring the window down a little bit, you'll see the little fave icon image displaying next to the left of the title of the website. Then for fave icon images, you can use PNG, JPG, or use an ICO image, which there are converters for on the web if you just do a search for PNG to ICO. And the image of the fave icon will typically be under 100 pixels and square, as you can see with the dimensions down here. So moving down the page, next we'll have our CSS file links. So the first one will be to the Bootstrap min.css file. So if I hit Command B again and open up the Explorer here in Visual Studio Code, we'll see that file inside of the folder in addition to the style.css file. Then the last link here in the head section will be our link to Google Fonts. So if we just go over to the web browser, you could do a search for Google Fonts or just go to fonts.google.com. And the font that we'll be using in this design is called Poppins. So I'll just do a search for that and hit the plus sign. Then the little bar is going to appear at the bottom of the page, so I'll just select that. And then we'll get the option to customize the font. And the Poppins font is one of the better looking lightweight fonts. So you might want to select some lightweight, such as 200 or 300. And you can also select bold if you want. Then what we'll do is copy the link and paste it in here. As you can see, it's already pasted and added for us. And then in addition to that, we'd want to grab the font family for our style.css sheet, which as you can see here is already added as well. So back in index.html, working our way down the page, you'll see that I have a number of different comments for us laid out for the different sections of the website. Then at the very bottom of the page, we'll have our links to the JavaScript files. And the first JS file that we'll link to will be the jQuery file, which the Bootstrap JavaScript file for features such as the drop-down menu are required to run on. But just make sure you use 3.4.1 because jQuery 3.5 Bootstrap isn't compatible with yet. Then underneath that, we'll have the Bootstrap min.js file, which we referenced earlier, followed by the popper min.js file, which Bootstrap recommends for features such as their modal pop-up, but we're not going to be building that in our website today. But just in case you want to add that feature later, you can use that file. Then the last file here will be for our icons from a website called Font Awesome. So you can go to their website up here at fontawesome.com and do a search for icons or use the icons tab. Then once you're on the icons page, you'll see that all of the icons that are showing up dark in color and aren't with a lighter opacity will be the free icons that we can use. So if I just do a search for HTML, we'll see that we get the HTML5 icon. So I can hit to copy that icon HTML. Then back in our index.html file, if we just paste that in and save it, we can take a look in Google Chrome, and there we see the icon displaying. Then with Font Awesome, we can use their class to make it 5 times as large with FA-5X for a quick and easy way to resize the icon. So now moving over to style.css, you'll see that we have a little bit of info included for the body of the website with overflow-x hidden, which will make it so we don't have any horizontal overflow left and right. So that will prevent the possibility of there being any bars or white space on the sides of the screen. And we also have our font family added, which we referenced earlier. Then the comments for the layout of our website, including the media query started for us here for the smaller width devices, which we'll add a few style declarations to for the resizing of the website as we get down to smaller width screens. Then we'll also see a reference point for the different Bootstrap device width breakpoints that we'll reference throughout the video. And with these breakpoints, we can change the number of different columns we want out of the 12-column Bootstrap grid system. Then lastly, in the style.css document, I've included this Bootstrap mobile gutter fix to prevent horizontal scrolling from the fixed image background to make sure that there aren't any issues on devices such as the iPhone. And then also included for the iPhone and iPad devices will be this style here for the fixed background image. So we'll add some of the CSS to display and customize the fixed background image, but the main CSS, which is really specific for iOS, I wanted to include for us already. Now let's get started with laying out the HTML for the landing page header section. So let's move back over to index.html, and I'm going to get rid of the content that we added for testing purposes here with the heading and the Font Awesome icon so we can get started with laying out the landing page header. Before we do that though, I mentioned earlier that I would give a quick intro to the Emmet feature in Visual Studio Code, which is the shortcut we can use for laying out our HTML. So as an example, we can type out any tag and then hit enter for the HTML opening and closing tags to be filled out for us, or we can add a period and add a class name in addition to a hashtag and the ID name, or if we want to, we don't have to use the div tag at all. We can just add hashtag home or do the same with classes. And if we're not using the div tag, we can say, for example, nav.home and have the nav tag given a class. We can also add elements inside of one another. So we'll use the home class as a parent element, and then inside of that, we'll add a child element with the about class, and then hit enter, and it'll populate the tags for us. Then we can also use Emmet to lay out multiple different classes. So we just say column times 3, and then inside of each column that we want to display 3 times, we'll add an image that will have a class called w-100 or width-100, and then hit enter. And as you can see, everything is filled out for us. So now we're ready to start laying out the HTML for our landing page header. And I'm just going to change landing page to landing header because it's not really taking up the full page unless we're on a really small device. So the first thing that we'll add will be a class that will wrap around the whole landing section from the top of the website to the top of the navigation before the navigation starts. So we're just going to call that class landing with a period for a class and then landing. And I'm going to hit enter and then add some space in between here. Then let's add the heading 4 at the top where it says Modern Design Concepts. And all of the styling for the heading 4 and the heading 1 that we'll be adding underneath it will be done in style.css, but we'll learn about the Bootstrap classes that we could use to style this text as we're working our way through the website with some other text that we'll be laying out. So there we have our modern design concept text. So let's add the heading 1 now for the welcome to our website text underneath it. So I'll write welcome to our website, and the capitalization won't matter here because we're going to make all of the text or characters capitalized later on anyways. And now if we take a look in Google Chrome, we'll see our heading 4 and heading 1 text. So let's start laying out the font awesome icons that are underneath the headings. So the icons will be inside of columns, and with Bootstrap, we'll need to wrap our columns with a row. So we'll add the class row. Then we'll also add a custom class that we'll call home, which we'll use to add some spacing around the text and icons. And with the columns that we're going to be putting the font awesome icons inside of, we're going to keep them centered on the page, even though we're going to be changing the number of columns that they'll take up as we flex the window up. So to keep them centered on the page, we're going to use a Bootstrap class called justify-content-center. And then we're also going to add the class text center, which will center the icons inside of the actual columns. Then the last bit of classes that we'll add here will be to adjust the padding at a certain breakpoint. So when we flex the window up, our column widths are going to change, and to keep them relatively narrow at the medium screen breakpoint, or 768 pixels, we're going to add some padding off to the sides of the columns containing our font awesome icons. So briefly in the Bootstrap documentation, I'm going to show you what the padding is. So if we just do a search for the notation or padding or margin, we can see that we have M and P for margin and padding, and then we can use 1 through 5 or 0 to declare from 0 padding all the way up to 3 rem padding, and 1 rem is equal to 16 pixels, so that would mean 48 pixels of padding with P-5 or padding-5. One other thing that we can do is we can apply padding or margin to breakpoints specifically. For example, the medium screen breakpoint, or MD, which is the 768 pixel mark. So we'll say PX for padding x-axis, meaning horizontal, and then MD, so the medium screen 768 pixel width, and then 5. So basically it means at the 768 pixel medium screen width, we're going to add horizontal padding of 3 rem to either side of this row. Then when we get up to the large screen width at 992 pixels, we're not going to need the padding anymore because our columns are going to decrease in size. So let's remove the padding with px-lg-0. So now let's hit enter and we can start adding our first column for the very first icon with the globe. So that's going to be this icon right here. And we're going to start from the small screen up to the largest screen. So we're going to say col-3, which will take up 3 out of the 12 available columns on the smallest of screens, so underneath 576 pixels. Then once we get up past 576, we can change it to a different number of columns. So briefly, I'll show you in the grid system, we have a 12 column layout, as you'll see here with the number of columns, and then we can add col- for the number of columns we want to use and change it on all these different device width breakpoints from extra small all the way up to extra large screen widths. So this is also, as we know, in the style.css document at the bottom here where you can see the MD or LG for the different screen widths. So in our case, for the columns containing the icons, they're going to be relatively narrow. So at the smallest screen width, as I mentioned, we'll go from 3 out of the 12. And then once we get up past 576 pixels, we'll use 2 out of the 12 columns. We'll say col-SM for 576, and then -2. And then the next breakpoint will be up at the large screen width, because at the medium screen width, we're applying the padding horizontally. So once we get up to the 992 pixel width, which is also the point where our navigation will display or expand, we'll say that we want to take up only 1 column. So we'll add col-LG-1 out of the 12 columns. And then I'm also going to remove any padding from the columns so we can have our icons take up more space. So let's add P-0 for padding 0. Then we can hit enter and we'll be ready to add our first Font Awesome icon. So to get our first Font Awesome icon, let's go back over to the Font Awesome website, and I'm going to do a search for globe, and then we'll see the different globe icons that we'll be using right here. So we'll have 4 different globe icons, and the first one that we're going to be using is going to be the Africa globe. But first, I'm going to open up the documentation in a new tab so we can see how to layer our Font Awesome icons. So we'll go to Stacking Icons, and from here we'll see a couple of examples that we can use. And let's select the first one where we see the Twitter icon inside of the square, but the flag icon inside of the circle will work just as well also. And then I'm going to take that HTML and paste it inside of our column here. Then once we do, we're going to see the Twitter icon inside of the square in Google Chrome. And I'm going to change the square to a circle. Then let's change the Twitter icon to the first globe icon, which, as I mentioned, will be the Africa globe first. Then instead of copying the icon, because we'll want a few of the classes that follow it, I'm going to type in globe-Africa instead. Then if we save it from here and take a look in Google Chrome, we'll see that we're going to have some trouble with it displaying because we'll need to change the first class to FAS instead of FAB, which I believe is for brand, which Font Awesome does for the brand icons. And now that we have our first icon set, the rest of this section will be easy because instead of typing out all of the classes for the column as well as the icon, we can simply copy the entire column that we see here and paste it underneath. Then the only thing that we'll need to change, for now at least, in the HTML will be the name of the Font Awesome icon class. So we're going to have Asia as our second icon right here. So I'll just change this to Globe Asia. Then we'll have Americas for North and South America. Then the last one is going to be Europe. So it's going to be FA Globe-Europe. So now if we save it in our text editor, we'll have all of our icons laid out in Google Chrome. Now let's add our CSS styling for the landing page section of the website. So now that we have all of our icons and headings filled out, let's make them look like the original here with the gradient background. So earlier I mentioned that we could add Bootstrap classes to center our text. So for example, we can just add text center here and add text uppercase, for example, to make it uppercase. But I'm going to do away with the centering of the text and apply that inside of the landing class CSS. So let's reference that class here with .landing. And then we're going to add text align center, which will apply the centering of the text to all of our elements inside of the class. Then let's also add text transform uppercase here, which will make our heading 4 and heading 1 text uppercase. So now we're ready to add our background gradient. And before we do that, I just want to show you a great tool for picking colors, which is also on the resources page of my website. And this is a resource called colorhex.com. And then another great tool to have is a simple color picker as an extension on your web browser. So I'll use the color picker to select this blue shade, and then we can add this hex value to the background image gradient that we'll add, and I'll add the purple shade in manually with the hex value. So let's add background image and then linear gradient, and in parentheses 90 degrees, which is left to right, and then the first hex value for the blue shade, followed by the purple hex value, which is 981 CEB. So now if we save it and take a look in Chrome, we'll have our gradient background color started. So now let's drop down and start styling the heading 4 and heading 1 text, and we'll also add the padding so we can see more of the gradient around the home class that we added. So underneath the heading and icons CSS comment, let's reference the heading 4 tag. So if we're going to add other heading 4 and heading 1s down the page, we might want to reference the landing class first, so it only applies the CSS to the heading 4 and heading 1 inside of the landing class. But since this is the only heading 4 we'll add and heading 1, we'll simply add H4 and H1. First, let's change the black color to white with color white, and then we're going to change the font weight. As I mentioned previously, we'll be using some light weights with the Poppins font, so let's add font weight 200. Then let's change the font size for the heading 4 to make it a little bit larger with font size 1.6 rem, and space the characters out with letter spacing 0.1 rem. Then we can add padding to the top of the heading 4 or to the home class, but let's just add it to the H4 for now. So let's add padding top, and it's up to you how much space you want, but I'm going to add 7 rem. And then with the finished version, it might be tough to tell, but we're going to add a little bit of text shadow to the heading text. So you can mess with the text shadow to make it darker. It's probably really tough to see that there's any text shadow on video, but there is a little bit, and let's add that here at the bottom of our heading 4 styling. So let's write text shadow, and then we're going to add 0.5 rem for the horizontal value, as well as the vertical value and the blur radius. Then let's add RGBA so we can add black with an opacity. So we'll add all zeros for red, green, blue to make black. Then for alpha, you can customize this to your liking. So for example, if it's just 1, it's going to be an all black text shadow, but I'm going to make this really light with 0.15. But as I mentioned, you can customize it to your own liking. So now let's drop down to the heading 1 styling for the welcome to our website text. And we're going to use mostly the same style declarations as the heading 4, so we can just copy this and paste it, and then just change the heading to heading 1 instead. The first thing that we'll see will be the padding above it, so let's do away with that padding and reduce the font size to 3 rem. Then to make sure that it matches the original, I'm going to bring the screen width up to make sure that it's up past the breakpoint widths. Whoops. And let's apply the padding to the top and bottom of the heading 1 text next. So let's add padding 1.8 rem top bottom and 0 left right. And then if we save that and go back and forth from the finished version and our version, looks like there's a little bit more letter spacing. So we'll add letter spacing 0.2 rem. So now we're going to be matching up to the original with the heading 4 and heading 1 text. So let's move down to the font awesome icons, and we can also add some padding to that home class. So let's reference that home class that's inside of the row element here. And I'm going to add some padding to the bottom. You can also apply the padding from the H4 here if you want to, of 7 rem. But for now, I'll just add padding bottom 7 rem. And now we'll have the matching padding from the original. The first thing that we'll do with the font awesome icons is let's increase the overall font size for the stacked icons. So what we can do is reference the fa-stack class in addition to fa-2x that we see here. So I'll copy these classes and paste it in underneath the home class. And then since they're classes within the same element, we don't want there to be any space in between them. Then let's increase the overall font size to 2.3 rem. And since we're on the original and not on this version, I'm just going to change that. So when I save it, you can see the difference, as we see there, of the increase of the font size overall for the icons. Next, let's alter the black circle behind the globe to make it lighter in color by changing the opacity. So let's reference the class from our Font Awesome classes with the circle FA Stack 2X. So I'll copy that class and then paste it in here in style.css. Then let's change the opacity to 0.15. That's going to give us sort of a light gray shade that we're seeing. And then let's also change the opacity of the globes. And we're going to target all of the globes, and then we'll change the opacity of the Americas globe to make it white in color afterwards. So let's target the FA Stack 1X class. So I'll add that class here, and let's decrease the opacity to 0.7 or 70%. Then to separate the Americas globe from the rest, as we see with the original here, we're going to make it a little bit larger and change the opacity to make sure that we see it as its original color of white. So let's target that class for the globe Americas specifically. And then let's change the opacity to 1 from the 0.7 that we just gave all the globes. So now it's displaying as white. And then we can change the size of it by saying transform, then scale, and in parentheses we'll say 1.25 or 125%. And now we have our globe icons matching the original design. Now let's lay out the HTML for our responsive navigation menu. To get started with our sticky navigation menu, which as we know is going to stay at the top of the screen when we scroll down the page, let's go back over to index.html and locate the navigation comment included for us. And before we get started, as a reference point, if you want to check out the navbar documentation at Bootstrap's website, you can just do a search for navbar and then check out the different examples and explanations that they have for the different classes that we'll be using to build the navbar. So moving back over to index.html, let's get started with the nav tag. And we're going to give the nav tag a class called navbar. Then we'll also need to apply a background color and a class to set our links light in color. So we're going to use the class bg-dark, which will start us off with the dark background color, and then the class navbar-dark, which will give us links that are light in color for a dark background. Then the next class that we'll add will need to specify the width at which we want it to expand from the mobile version of the menu to the full width version, and that's going to be 992 pixels. So let's add navbar-expand-LG, and LG, as we know, is the 992 mark. Then to give the menu its sticky top feature, where it stays at the top of the website when we scroll down, we're going to use that class. So it's going to be sticky-top. And once you fill that out, we can hit enter because that's going to be the last class for the actual nav tag. Then what we'll do is inside of the nav tag, we're going to set a max width for our navigation so it doesn't span the full width of the page if we flex up past 1200 pixels. Then we'll also add a class for some additional horizontal padding on either side of the navigation. So we'll use the container class with Bootstrap and then px-3 for our horizontal padding of 1 rem, and the container class will set the max width as opposed to container fluid, which wouldn't have any max width. Next, let's add the logo, which will be the first thing inside of our navbar before the navigation links. So we're going to add that inside of a link with the A tag, and we'll give it a class called navbar-brand, which is a standard class for logos. Then inside of that, we'll have our image. So I'll hit enter, and you can leave the image link blank with a hashtag, or if you're making a multi-page website, you can add index.html to link back to your homepage. I'll leave the link blank in this case. And then for the image source, we're going to add img/logo-white. And if you're curious to see the logo size that I'm using, if we go into the image folder and select logo-white, you can look to the bottom of the screen and see that it's 500 pixels by 145 pixels. So now let's go back over to Google Chrome and pull up the version we're working on so we can take a look at the logo. And for some reason, it's not appearing just yet, so it might have an issue with the sticky top class at first. So let's remove that and then we'll add it back in just a bit. Okay, so now we're seeing it displaying underneath the landing page section. If you want, optionally, you can add alternative text for the logo in case the image doesn't display. This is the text that would appear. And you can also add a title if you want. So when we hover over the logo for a moment, you'll see that title text appear. And then, for example, if the image doesn't show up, you would just see the alternative text. So before we go and resize the logo in the CSS and add back the sticky top class, let's move on to add the button next with the Dropdown feature so we can add the navigation links which the button will open. So to do this, let's start with a button tag. And then we're going to give this button a class that's called navbar-toggler. Then inside of that, we're going to have a span tag. And the span tag will be for the hamburger menu icon. So that's going to be span.navbar-toggler icon. So now if we save it, we'll have our hamburger menu, which is going to be light in color because of our navbar-dark class that we added. And now we're ready to add the drop-down functionality when we click on it. So we're going to need to add type equals button and then data-toggle collapse for the opening and collapsing JavaScript feature from the Bootstrap library, and then the ID that we're going to open and collapse for our data target will be for the element that wraps around the unordered list for our navigation. And that ID will be called navbar responsive. So hashtag for the ID and then navbar responsive, and I'll do a capital R with a camel character because it's next to an R. And now we're ready to drop down to the element that was just referenced. So let's start that with Bootstrap's collapse class, followed by navbar-collapse. Then we can add the ID that we just mentioned, which is navbar responsive. So you can copy that and paste it or type it out. Now we're ready to add our unordered list, which will contain all of our list items and navigation links. So let's start with UL for the unordered list, and we'll give it a class called navbar-nav. Then we'll need to specify where we want our navigation to be located at the full screen width. So in our case, it's going to be positioned off to the right, which would be margin left auto, and off to the left, it would be margin right auto. Then centered, it would be margin 0 auto or MX auto. So let's add the class ML auto to position it off to the right. And inside of our unordered list, we'll have our list items for each navigation link, which will have a class called nav-item. And we're going to have 5 different navigation links. So we'll say times 5. Then inside of each list item, we'll have our link with a class called nav-link. So now we're ready to hit enter and add the text for our navigation links as well as the links if you don't want to leave them blank. So we'll add home for the first link. Now if we save it and take a look, we'll see that we have our first link showing up. Then similar to the logo link, you can add a hashtag here, or you can link to index.html to go back to your home page. I'm going to add a hashtag though for each one of the links by selecting all instances using Shift-Command-L. Then let's add the second link by saying about. And if we check the links, there's not going to be a difference between the two. So we'll want to add the active class to the first link. That way it's going to be lighter in color. So now if we check it again, we'll have the active link with a different shade than the rest of the links. So now we're ready to add the rest of our navigation links. So I'll add the services link next, followed by the projects link, and then the contact us link underneath that. So now if we save it and take a look in Chrome and flex the window up, we'll see that we have all 5 of our navigation links filled out. Now let's add the CSS to our navigation menu. First, let's resize the logo before we add any style to the background color or the links. So we're going to need to reference the navbar brand class to target the logo as well as the image. So I'm going to copy the navbar brand class and then add the class here in style.css underneath the navigation comment. And then we'll also add image after navbar brand. And I'm going to adjust the height to 3 rem, which is the equivalent of 48 pixels. So that looks good, except for we're going to add a little bit of additional padding to the top of the logo. So when we use the sticky top navigation, the logo isn't too close to the top of the window. So now let's go back to style.css and add some padding top to the logo of 0.2 rem. So now with our logo resized, let's move on to styling the actual navbar. So to do that, we'll reference the navbar class from Bootstrap. And let's start with matching the navbar to the gradient color that we gave the landing header section. So let's go back to style.css and add the navbar class. And then what we can do is just copy the background image linear gradient from the landing class and paste the same CSS into the navbar. So now if we save it, we're going to have the matching gradient. So it looks like it's all one big element now. Then what we can do to bring back the sticky top feature is let's add that class back. And then I'm also going to add some space underneath the navigation for now, so we can see the sticky top feature in action. So I'm just going to add an empty div here and give it some style with a height of 100 vertical height. So it's the height of the full page. That way we can scroll down and see that the sticky top navigation is working. So next, let's go back over to style.css. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit more of additional padding to the navbar. So we could always do this using Bootstrap classes in the HTML, but I'd like to customize it here in the CSS. So what we're going to do is add a little bit more padding off to the left of 0.3 rem, then 0 top bottom. Then for the right side, we'll add a little bit more padding with 0.6 rem. That way the drop-down button and the navigation links aren't so close to the side of the page. So I'll add 0.6 rem to the right, as I said. Then the last bit of styling that we'll add to the navigation bar itself is going to be the box shadow that we see underneath it, which I think looks really great for a sticky navigation, and box shadow makes the gradients pop out a little bit more as well. So for the box shadow, we'll add a 0 horizontal offset because we want it to span the whole width. And I'm going to grab this RGBA value from our text shadow earlier and add 0 horizontal, 1 rem span for the vertical and for the blur radius as well. So now when we save it, we'll see the box shadow appear underneath the navigation, and you can adjust that to a different setting if you want. So obviously 0.9 is going to be really dark, but 0.3 or 0.2 might not be too dark. I think a good medium is 0.15 though. So now that we have the navbar styling set, let's move on and start styling our navigation links. So to style our navigation links, we'll need to get the class from the link itself, which is the nav-link class. So we can reference that directly. And once we add nav-link, the first thing that we'll do is change the color of all the links to white. So once we add color white and we check out the website, we'll see that they're not white yet because we have these bg-dark and navbar-dark classes here. Well, the navbar-dark class is really the one that's keeping them white. So what we could do is we can remove that, but then we're going to have this blue styling when we hover over the link. So we're going to keep these classes and we'll just add color white important to override the color styling from those classes. So now that we have our links white, let's make them uppercase and let's also give them a lighter font weight. So we're going to say text transform uppercase and let's give them a font weight of 200. Then let's also space out the characters a little bit, similar to what we did with the headings because they're kind of close together here. So we'll add letter spacing 0.12 rem. And then we should be ready to adjust the size. So the original, as you can see, is going to be significantly bigger in size. So let's say font size 1.2 rem. Then I'm also going to apply the same text shadow that we gave the heading 1 text. So I'll just copy the text shadow and then paste that into the nav link CSS. And now if we save it, it's going to be close to the original except for the spacing in between the links and obviously the underline. So let's add margin right 0.8 rem to space out the navigation links. So now if we save it and toggle back and forth between the original, we shouldn't see any difference except for that underline for the active and hover state of the navigation links. So to apply the underline for that, we'll need to target the active class that we gave the first link, and we'll also target the hover pseudo class. So let's reference the same nav link class, and after it we'll say .active for the active class, and then we'll add a comma so we can apply the same CSS to the hover pseudo class with navlink : hover. Then instead of applying an underline to the text, we're going to add a border to the bottom of it with border bottom 0.05 rem solid white. This way we'll have a nice bit of separation between the text and the border or underline under the text. Next, let's add the heading HTML and CSS that appears underneath our landing page header. So to get started with our header where we have the asterisk on either side and the underline, let's move back over to index.html and locate the heading comment. So let's get rid of the vertical height here and drop down underneath the heading comment. Then the first thing that we'll add will be a container, which will have a row inside of it. And we're going to give the Let's Build It heading a full width column. That way we can have additional padding and margin added to our row and column. So let's add our row inside of the container, and then I'm going to show you what we're going to do with the padding. So on the smallest screen width, we're not going to have any padding, but on the large screen, as you can see, there's a significant amount of padding. So what we're going to do is say padding 0 top bottom with py-0. Then if we go back to Google Chrome and flex the window up past 768 pixels, you'll see that there's going to be some additional padding. So let's add py-md-3 to have 1 rem of padding top bottom on the medium screen width. Then when we get up to the large screen width, we're going to have 3 rem padding top bottom with py-lg5. Then inside of our row, once we hit enter and add some space, we're going to use a full width column with col-12, which we'll use to center our text and make it uppercase, as well as add some additional margin on the top. So let's add col12 text-center, then text uppercase. Then we'll also add margin top 5 for an additional 3 rem of margin above the heading. Now let's add our heading 1, and just as an example, I'm going to use the text-dark class from Bootstrap. You can look up the Bootstrap text colors, so you can add text-primary for blue text, for example. And then we're also going to add pb-3 for padding bottom 3 underneath the text before we get to the underline. Then for the actual text, let's type in let's build it, and the text uppercase class will take care of the capitalization for us. So now if we refresh, there we have our let's build it text. So next let's add our asterisk from Font Awesome, which we see on either side. So I'm going to go back over to the Font Awesome website and do a search for the asterisk icon. And once the icon appears, I'm going to select it and then hit the copy the icon HTML. And what we'll do is we're going to paste it on either side of the Let's Build It text inside of the heading 1 tag. So if we save it and take a look, it's going to be the same size as the heading 1 text, but we'll resize it using the CSS in just a moment. First, let's add the border underneath the Let's Build It text though. So we can use Bootstrap's border classes to do this. So let's drop underneath the heading 1 and add border-top. And we're going to use the border dark color, which is black, similar to the text. So with Bootstrap, if you're not aware already, with borders similar to text colors and button colors, we'll have the different colors to select from that you see here. So we have primary for blue and dark for black or white for white and so on. Then we're also going to need to set a width for the border and center it. So I'm going to use width 100 with W-100 to show you as an example. And to center it, we'll use the mx-auto class, which is margin 0 auto. So now if we save it, we're going to have a full width border. So what we can do is we can reduce W-100 to W-25, as you see here, but we're going to stick with W50, which will span the length of the heading 1 and the asterisk. So now that we have all of our HTML laid out for the heading, let's go over to style.css so we can match it up with the original. And the first thing that we'll do is let's grab the class for the asterisk so we can add that to style.css. That way we can target this icon without affecting the size of any others. So let's add our period for the class and then fa-asterisk. And let's reduce the font size to 1 rem and see where that ends us up. So now if we take a look, you'll see that the asterisk is at the bottom of the heading 1. So let's add the CSS margin-bottom 0.5 rem, and that's going to center it with the height of the heading 1 text. Now let's lay out the 3-column section HTML and CSS. So moving on to the 3-column section, what we could do is we could add the row for the 3-column section into the container that we started for the heading above it, but I like to add a new container sometimes if we need a class to add additional padding to an element. So here, let's start off with a new container, and I'm going to add some additional padding to the bottom underneath it before the fixed background image section. So let's add PB-4 for padding bottom 1.5 rem. Then inside of this, we'll have our row, and I'm going to add some padding to the top of it to space out the 3-column section from the heading and underline with the class PT-3 for padding top 1 rem. Then let's also add some padding bottom to the row as well with PB-5 for 3 rem padding bottom. And all of our text will be centered inside of the 3-column section, so let's add the class text-center. So next, let's get started with our 3-column sections, and we're going to have the breakpoint for the column at the 992 pixel mark, where we go from the single column layout up to the 3-column layout. So we'll want to reference the LG in our column class. So let's add col-lg-3. And then we're going to add some padding around the column so it's not too close to the other column. So let's add P-4 for a padding of 1.5 rem all around. And now we're ready to add the heading where it says parallax design. So we're going to use a H3 tag for that. And let's add some margin to the top and bottom of it with my-4. Then I'll write parallax design. Okay, so now if we save it and take a look in Chrome, we'll have our first column started where we have our parallax design text. So now let's move down to the image that appears underneath that. And for the image, we're going to specify a width similar to the border width so it stays within the column. So we're going to use the W-100 class so the image takes up 100% of the column width. And then we're also going to add a class called rounded with Bootstrap, which will round the corners. So in the documentation, if we go further down the border page, you'll see the different options for having rounded corners. So simply using the class rounded will give us border radius around each corner of the image. So now for the image source, I'm going to add image/parallax.jpg. Okay, so let's take a look in Chrome. There we have our rounded image, but the sizing is a little off, so I must have messed something up with the column width because it's not nearly as wide as the original. So that should be col-lg-4 instead of col-lg-3 because 4, of course, goes into 12 3 times for our 3-column layout. So next, let's add the paragraph text that appears underneath the parallax image. And with the paragraph text, we're going to use a class called lead with Bootstrap, which will use the 300 font weight from our font family with Google Fonts right here for the Poppins font. And let's also add some padding top to the paragraph text with PT-3 for 1 rem to separate it from the image. Then once we add our text, we'll be ready for the button underneath it to complete the column. So earlier I mentioned that we can use different classes for different colors with borders and buttons using the Bootstrap framework. So if we just do a search for buttons, you'll see all of the different colors here with the solid colors, and then we can use the outline colors as well, which you'll see further down the page. So we're going to use the btn-outline dark color, which will be a black outline, and when we hover over it, it'll turn black with the white text inside of the button. So let's use a link with the A tag for our button, then btn, which is used for all Bootstrap buttons, followed by the btn outline dark class for the color that we want for the button. Then we can specify the size using a class. So we can use SM for small buttons or LG for large buttons, which we'll do later in the tutorial further down the page. But for these, we're going to use the medium size button with btn-md. For the link, you can link to a different page, for example, with a HTML document like index.html. I'm just going to leave it blank and add the text HTML5 and CSS3. All right, so now if we save it, we'll have our full column completed with the text, button, and image. So instead of typing out this column completely again with the HTML, I'm going to copy it and paste it in here twice. That way, all we'll need to do is change a little bit of the text and the image files. So let's change this text to the canvas design, then the resume design. Then we'll change the images next. So let's change this to the canvas.jpg file. Then we have the resume.jpg file. And once we have the images set, let's change the buttons to Bootstrap designs for the second one, followed by the theme bundle button for the third column. Okay, so now if we save it, we should be looking close to the original, except for you'll notice that the heading is going to be different with the finished design. So it's going to be a lighter font weight. And in addition to changing the heading, we'll add some box shadow around the images. So let's reference the heading 3 tag with h3 in style.css, and then we'll give it the light font weight of 300 to match the original design. So now that that's matching up, let's add the box shadow to the images. To do that, let's target the W-100 class so we can apply it to these images as well as the image that we'll add further down the page. Then for the box shadow effect, we can take that CSS from the nav bar and paste it in. Then the only thing that we'll change is we're not going to have as much of a shadow, so we'll use 0.2 rem horizontal, 0.2 rem vertical, and 0.2 rem as our blur radius. Then I'm also going to decrease the opacity of the color slightly to 0.1 from 0.15. Next, let's add our fixed background section, HTML and CSS. So underneath the 3-column section that we just laid out, we have our fixed background image window with the laptop image as our background. And if you remember from the beginning of the tutorial, we already have some CSS laid out for us for the fixed background image section to make sure that it functions properly on Apple devices such as the iPhone and the iPad. So let's add these 3 HTML classes in index.html, then we'll specify the background image and the spacing that we'll give it for the window. Underneath the start fixed background image comment, let's add the fixed background class. Then inside of that, we'll have the fixed-wrap class, followed by the fixed class inside of that. And the fixed class will be the class we'll use to reference the background image. Then we'll use the fixed-background class above it to add the spacing, and we'll also add some box shadow. First, let's add the spacing using the fixed-background class. So we'll reference fixed-background, and I'm going to give it a padding of 12 rem top bottom and 0 left right. Then to add the background image, let's use the fixed class and add the background image style declaration, followed by URL, and then in parentheses and a single quote, we'll add .. / to exit out of the CSS folder before we go into the image folder. So we'll back out of CSS and then go into img / followed by the image file name, which is macbook.jpg. So now if we save it and take a look in Chrome, there we have our background image, but it's displaying in a relative position. So to make it fixed, let's add position fixed. Then we won't see the full effect of the fixed background image because we don't have any content underneath it, but if we scroll up, as you can see, it's staying in the fixed position. Then as a quick example, I'm going to show you how to add content on top of the fixed background image. So let's make the image whiter by giving it a light opacity of 0.3. Then we're going to see the white background behind it, making it easy to put text on top of it. And let's add some of our content that we added earlier. I'm going to copy the col12 that contains our heading and paste that inside of the fixed background class, in between that and the fixed wrap class. So now we'll see that we have the heading sitting right on top of the fixed background image, and we can always change around the padding in our CSS to reflect the spacing around that text if we want. So the last thing that we'll do with the fixed background section is the original has some box shadow around it to make it look like the fixed background image sort of pops out of the rest of the page as we scroll down the website. So let's take the box shadow that we used for the images with the W-100 class. Then I'm going to remove the 0.2 rem for the horizontal and vertical, then change the blur radius to 1 rem. Then if we change the color to just plain black by making this 1 instead of 0.1, you'll see that it's going to be kind of dark, but it's actually not too bad with it popping out a little more. I'm going to reduce this to 0.25 though, to have a 25% black color appearing. Now let's lay out the HTML and CSS for the 2-column section. So let's drop down underneath the fixed background image section, and we'll be adding the heading where it says website designs, as well as the 2-column section underneath that. First, for our heading, since we already added the heading HTML for the let's build it text, let's copy that HTML so we can paste it underneath the heading comment that follows the fixed background image section. Then to match the original design, let's change the text to website designs. And now if we take a look, we'll see our heading, and we'll also get to see more of the fixed background image effect. Now let's add the 2-column section that appears underneath the heading. So let's locate that comment, and I'm going to correct this to say 2. Then we'll start our HTML off with the container class. And we're also going to add some padding to the bottom of this. So let's use 3 rem of padding bottom with the class pb-5. And inside of the container, we'll have our row. Then with the row, let's add some additional padding top of 1 rem with pt-3, in addition to 3 more rem on the bottom with pb-5. Then you might also notice that the 2-column section is going to be slightly narrower than the 3-column section. So let's add some horizontal padding with px-4 for 1.5 rem on either side. Then once we add some space, we'll be ready to add the first column containing the heading, paragraph text, and the button on the left. So we're going to use up half of the screen and go from the single column width to the 2-column width at the large screen mark of 992 pixels. So since there's only 2 columns and they're both using up half of the screen, we can just add col-LG or add col-LG6 to specify that we're using half of the 12-column grid system. Then let's also add some margin to the bottom of the column with MB-4, because when we flex the window down, it's going to be pretty close to the image underneath it. And I'll actually add a little bit more space with MB-5 to have more space than the original underneath the button. And once we get up to the large screen width, we'll have auto margin top and bottom, so this column matches up with the middle of the image on the right. To do that, let's apply margin to the top and bottom with MY-, then LG for the large screen, and auto for margin top bottom auto. Next, let's add the heading 3 text underneath that, and we'll use the class text-dark, or you can add your own color from the Bootstrap documentation. Then let's also add some margin to the bottom of it with MB-3 for 1 rem underneath our heading. Then add the text "See the collection," period. Next, let's add the paragraph text that appears underneath the See the Collection text that we have added. So I'm going to copy the paragraph text, or you can just add lorem and hit enter in Visual Studio Code for dummy text. And we're going to use the lead class again to give it the lightweight font of 300. And let's also add some margin to the bottom of it with MB-4 for 1.5 rem. All right, so now for the button, we're going to use the same medium-sized button with the BTN outline light class. So we can just copy that from the 3-column section and paste that in. Then I'll change the text to the bundle pack from theme bundle. And seeing the button, let's actually change this to the large button with BTN-LG instead of MD. So now that our first column is set, let's add our second column that includes the image on the right. So once again, we'll use the same col-lg-6 class for the 6 out of 12 available columns. Then inside of that, we'll have our image, and we'll add the class w-100 to make sure that our image doesn't span outside of the column width. Then let's also add the rounded class. So if you remember, we added that to the 3-column section. So I'll add period rounded for that class. Then the image source is img/12 website bundle.jpg. And now if we save it and take a look in Chrome, there we have our 2-column section completed. Now let's start laying out the first part of the HTML and CSS for the footer section of the website. So let's move down to the footer section of the website and locate the footer or start footer comment in our HTML. Then let's add the tag footer, which we'll use to add the background color that'll span 100% of the width instead of using the container for a background color, which wouldn't take up the full width. Then let's add some margin on the top of 1.5 rem to give it some extra space above the footer. And inside of our footer tag, we'll add our container, followed by the row class. And all of our text is going to be white, so we'll use Bootstrap's text-light class in addition to text center. Then let's add some padding to the top and bottom of the footer of 1.5 rem with py-4. Then we can hit enter and we're ready to add our first column. So for the footer section, this is going to be a 3-column layout similar to the previous 3-column layout we added, where we went from the 1-column sections to the 3-column layout at the large screen width of 992 pixels. So with that, let's add the col-lg-4 class. Then let's also add a class to add some padding to the x-axis on the left and right. This way the top and bottom border on our headings won't take up too much space. So I'll add px-4 for padding left-right of 1.5 rem. Then similar to what we did with the 2-column section, for the first of our 3-column sections, we're going to center our content vertically by giving it a margin of auto on the y-axis with my-auto. Then for our content inside of the first column, let's add the image with our logo. So we'll add img and its logo-white.png. Then for the paragraph text underneath it, let's give it the lead class for the 300 font weight. And I'm going to copy this text and paste it in. As I said previously, you can use the lorem text if you want, or type this out. So now if we save it and take a look in Chrome, we're not going to see our content because we're using the text-light class for our white text, and we have the white logo. So let's add the background color before we do anything else with the footer section. To do that, let's reference the footer tag itself. Then we'll use the same gradient background image style declaration from the landing section as well as the navigation. So you can pull it from either class. So I'll paste that in. And now if we take a look, there we have our background color, but let's add some more styling to get down to the logo size before we add any more content to our footer. The first thing that we'll do is let's add the box shadow to the top of the footer section, which is similar to the navigation. So what we can do is go up to the navigation CSS and copy the box shadow. Then the only thing that we'll do to change it is we'll want it to have a negative vertical value so the box shadow appears above the section instead of beneath it. So if we save it, we'll see that we have the box shadow added, matching the shadow of the navigation now. And the only other thing that we'll do to the actual footer tag is let's add some additional padding. So we'll add padding 2.5 rem top bottom, and then I'll add 2 rem left right, and you can change that if you want, or add some horizontal padding to the container that we'll add inside of the footer section. Next, let's resize the logo. So to target the logo itself without targeting any other images, let's reference the footer tag followed by the image tag, and we're going to give the logo a height of 3.5 rem. And once we do that, let's also add some spacing around it. So I'm going to add some margin to the bottom, and to make sure that it's centered, we'll add auto for left right. So we'll use margin 0 top, auto left right, and 2 rem bottom. So now if we save it and take a look, the spacing looks good, similar to the original. So now we're ready to add the social media buttons that appear underneath the paragraph text. So we'll have the social media buttons inside of an unordered list, and I'm going to add some space here inside of the column for that. And we'll want to separate this unordered list from the navigation, so let's give it a class called social. Then let's add some padding to the top of it with the class pt-3 for 1 rem padding top. And if we take a look at how it appears on the mobile version of the website, we'll want to add some space to the bottom of the unordered list as well. So let's add pb-4 for 1.5 rem bottom. Then when we get up to the large screen width, we're going to remove that. This way there isn't any additional space altering the my-auto class in which centers the column vertically. Now for our list items inside of the unordered list, we're going to have 4 of those. So we'll say li times 4 using the emit feature with Visual Studio Code. Then inside of our list items, we'll have a link which will wrap around the icons. So now we're ready to add the icons inside of the links to the social media websites. So I'm going to flex the website back up to its full width, and then we'll go over to Font Awesome to select the icons. So I'll do a search for Facebook here, and I'm going to pick a different Facebook icon from the finished version. So I'll pick the Facebook square icon, then copy the HTML. Then once it's copied, I'll go back over to index.html and paste it in between the opening and closing A tag for the link. Now if we take a look, there we have the first icon appearing with Facebook. So let's add the rest of the icons now. So I'll just paste in the Facebook square class again and change this one to Twitter. Then for the second and third, I'll just delete these and copy the FA Twitter list item to paste that in, because then all I'll have to do is change Twitter to Instagram for the third and YouTube for the fourth. So now we have all of our icons ready to be styled. Now let's add the second part of the footer, HTML and CSS. So before we add any more HTML, let's start styling our social icons by making them the color white before we do anything else, because we're also going to make the links aside from the social icons white, which include the helpful links and then the phone number and email link in the Contact Us column. So let's target the links inside of the footer with footer A. And we have the text light class set up for the paragraph text to be white already in the footer section, but if we wanted to, we could add footer P to make all of our paragraph text white using the CSS, which will follow a column so we can select both elements. And though we didn't add the HTML for the socket section yet, we can also target the paragraph and links inside of the socket section that we'll be adding. So let's add the socket class that we'll add, followed by the A tag for the links, then socket and P for paragraphs. Then we'll make our text the color white, and the hover color for the icons will style separate from the rest of the links inside of the footer section. So let's start styling the social icons now. To get started, let's reference the social class with the unordered list by saying ul.social. Then let's do away with the bullet points next to the list items with list style type none. Then to display the icons in line, we'll say display flex. Then to center the icons or the list items, we'll add ul.social li, followed by margin 0 auto. Then with display flex, we're going to have equal space in between the social icons, as we can see, but they're pretty spaced out. So let's set a max width to the unordered list of 18 rem to bring them closer together. Now that our spacing is corrected, let's resize the social icon. So in our HTML, if we used, for example, the FAB class or FAS class, what we'll find is that we're not going to be able to use that class to resize the icons, as you'll see here. So if we just say ul.social.fab and then font size 2.2 rem, nothing's going to change when we save it. So what we're going to do is, instead of using FAB or FAS, let's inspect the icons and use the font awesome class called svg-inline-fa so we can style all of the icons without targeting the individual class like fa-facebook-square. So with our icons resized, if we compare it to the original, they're not going to be as spaced out. So let's remove the padding from the unordered list with padding 0, and then we'll also add margin 0 auto to center the unordered list. So now we should be matching the original pretty well, but if we toggle back and forth, we'll notice a little bit of spacing difference because of the height of the other columns. So now let's go ahead and add the background color, which you see is a light gray, to the social media icons. To do that, in style.css, let's copy this style declaration and paste it beneath, then add the hover pseudo class, and we'll change the font size to color and the hex value D1, 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 which will give us that light gray color. All right, so now we have the first column of our footer section completed. Now let's add the third and last part of our HTML and CSS to the footer and socket section of the website. So let's lay out the rest of our columns in the footer section, starting with the helpful links column. So in index.html, let's drop down underneath the first column here. And similar to the first, the second one is going to be going from the single column width to the 3-column layout at the large screen width with col-lg-4. Then we'll also use the class px-4 to give us some horizontal padding. And with the last 2 columns, we're going to add some vertical padding as well with my-4 for 1.5 rem top bottom vertically. And the helpful links text will be inside of a heading 3. Then to add the borders on the top and bottom, we'll use Bootstrap's classes border top and border bottom. Then set a width for the border of 75% of the column width with W-75. And let's also center it with MX-auto and add a little bit of padding in between the text and the border with PY-2. So I'll hit enter to add the helpful links text. And if we take a look at the text in Google Chrome, once we save it, we'll see that it's going to match the original, but in case you want to customize the border, you can change this to 50 to have a narrower border. And you can also space out the borders a little more if you want from the text with PY-3 or PY-4. Okay, so now we're ready to add the links that appear underneath the heading 3 with the border top bottom. So let's start with the bundle pack link, and we're going to put these links inside of a paragraph tag, which will give us some line height and space out the links a little bit more. And with the links, I'm going to select the a:\blank for the target_blank attribute, so they open up in a new tab. Then for the actual link address, I'm going to copy the link from the finished version, which will go to my website. And since we didn't use the times table with Emmet, I'll just copy this and paste it in 3 times for the other 3 links. Now we're ready to add the text. So I'll add bundle pack for the first, then website themes for the second, and complete courses, then the resources page. And now if we save it and take a look at the links, we'll notice that they're a little bit smaller than the finished version, and when we hover over them, they're going to give us the blue color with the underline. So let's go back over to style.css and change the font size to 1.2 rem, and let's also change the font weight to 300. Then the last thing that we'll do to them is let's remove the blue color when we hover over the links. To do that, let's copy the footer and socket link style declaration and paste it underneath that. Then we can delete the paragraph tag references for the footer as well as the socket. Just make sure that you have the comma in between the two, and we'll leave the color white CSS. Then we'll have to add the hover pseudo class. So we'll add :hover for both the footer and the socket. Okay, so now if we take a look at it, we'll just have the underline appearing when we hover over the text. So let's move on to the third column, and I'm going to copy the second column HTML and paste it underneath so we can reuse the links and paragraphs. And the last two lines will simply be paragraphs, so we can remove the link, and I'll type in city, state, and then 5 zeros for the zip or postal code. And let's copy this and paste it in for the third one as well. Then change the text to 100 street name. Then for our email link as well as the phone number, we don't want target_blank because this will open up an email client or prompt a phone calling service instead of opening up a new tab. So for the mail link, we'll add mail to : plus, then the email address. So I'll write me@email.com as an example here. Then add me@w3newbie.com for the text that'll show up on the website. Then similarly for the telephone link, we'll add tel : plus, then the full phone number without any dashes. And for the text, we can write call us, or we can write the full phone number out. Okay, so now let's take a look at the footer section with the full width view. And I think the only thing that I'll change in addition to what we've already done is to add a little bit more space underneath the heading 3. So I'll add MB-3 instead of the PY-2, and that's going to add some more space between the border bottom and then our first link underneath that. Okay, so now we're ready to add the last bit of the website for the full width version, which is the socket at the very bottom of the site. So let's add the socket class here in the socket comment. And inside of the socket class, we'll have a paragraph tag, which will contain a link. And let's use the target attribute to open it up in a new tab. Then I'll add my website address here. And then we'll add the text for the link. And before the link text, which we're not going to be able to see yet because we don't have a background color for the footer, we'll add the copyright symbol, which is ampersand copy semicolon, and we'll also add a space after it to separate it from the link text. Then so we can actually see the text at the bottom of the page, let's add some style to the socket class. So underneath the socket comment here in style.css, let's write ;socket to reference the class, and we're going to give it the same background image gradient as the footer section and the rest of the gradient sections of the website, so we can paste that in. Then let's add text center to center the text. And now if we take a look, it's going to be pretty close to the bottom, so let's add some space around it with padding 1 rem all around. Then finally, let's add the border to the top of it with the CSS border top 0.05 rem solid white, which will be about 1 pixel. Okay, so that looks good, and I noticed that I messed up the text for the last of the 3 column sections in the footer. So I'll change the heading 3 text from helpful links to contact us for that last column right here. And once we've done that, that concludes all of the HTML and CSS for the full width version of the website. So if we size it down, now we can see we have the footer and the drop-down menu. And when we scroll up the screen, we have the fixed background section and all of the section columns, in addition to the header landing page section at the top. Now let's add the responsive CSS media queries to our website to make it mobile friendly. Okay, so let's take a look at how the website appears at the smallest screen width that I could flex Chrome down to, and we'll see that there's a difference in the size of the heading as well as the font awesome icons for the globes. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of CSS that's applied to the smaller screen widths to size down the heading text right here, as well as the font awesome icons, then the fixed image background section with the window further down the page. So in style.css towards the bottom of the file, we already have some media queries started for us to apply our style with the media query width set up to match the Bootstrap framework breakpoints. So we'll only need to grab the CSS for the elements that we want to override the style of, and I'm going to copy the CSS from the landing page icon size up to the heading 1 tag. And we'll paste that in to change the font styling of that underneath 1200 pixels. Then let's also copy the CSS for the fixed background class to change the padding for the fixed background image window. Then we can get rid of any CSS declarations that we're not going to change, like the home class padding bottom here. But you could, if you did want to change the spacing around on the landing page section. Then I'll also get rid of the box shadow for the fixed background and everything except for the font size for the heading 1. So let's change the heading 1 font size now and decrease it underneath 1200 pixels to 2.6 rem instead of the 3 rem size. Then for the FA stack font size, let's decrease that to 2 rem from 2.3 rem. Then for the fixed background image window, let's decrease the padding top bottom for that. So instead of 12 rem, I'm going to make it a little bit of a larger window than the original, and I'll change this to 9 rem, then decrease it a little bit more on the smaller screen widths. Now let's copy the same CSS style declarations and apply it to devices under 992 pixels. And I'll change the H1 font size to 2 rem, then the FA stack to 1.7 rem, and the fixed background section to 7 rem top bottom. Okay, so now if we size the website down, we'll see that our heading is going to shrink in size along with the font awesome icons. And if we scroll down the screen, the fixed image background section window will as well. So that's all for our CSS. You can apply additional CSS to device widths underneath 768 pixels if you want. The only other change I'll make, though, is to add a little bit of spacing between the heading where it says Website Designs and the first of the 2 column sections underneath it. Everything else here looks pretty good. So with that heading, you might recall that we added some margin to the top of it. So let's also add margin to the bottom by having my-5 instead of mt-5. Now the spacing is going to be pretty good, but when we go up to the full screen width, we're going to have a lot of space underneath it. So let's reduce the margin top bottom once we get up to the large screen width. And let's see. So actually, let's keep margin top 5 and only change the margin bottom to the reduced height of MB3. Okay, so that concludes the complete tutorial for building our Bootstrap website design with the modern design concepts layout. I want to thank you for watching. Please remember to check out the 12 website bundle pack by seeing the file included in the starter files, and stick around for the final lesson on how to upload your complete website to the internet. So I'm going to start from my website at w3newbie.com and go to the resources page where I'll have a link to Bluehost, which is the web host we're going to use to upload our website to the internet. Or you can just go to w3newbie.com/hosting, which I'll have a link to in the description. And this link will serve as a discount link to a page that Bluehost has created for me because I've been recommending their hosting services for so long to followers of my website and on YouTube, so followers can get a discount to their hosting plans. So once we're on the plans page, if you're just building one website, I would go with the basic plan, but if you're building more than that, I would go with the plus. But for a single website, the basic plan will serve just fine. You're probably never going to need more than 50 gigabytes in space. You'll get a free SSL certificate, which will give you the lock symbol up here. And then you'll have the option to have subdomains as well as 5 different domain name email accounts, which if you look to the resources page of my website, you'll learn how to add to Gmail. So the email storage wouldn't matter anyways with your emails going to Gmail using your domainname.com email address. So once you select the plan that you want, we're going to be brought to a page where we can create a new domain name or use a domain name we own. So since we get a free domain name anyways, I always choose to create a new one with my Bluehost accounts. And I'm going to sign up with the domain name drew-host.com just for an example domain name. I don't really have one that I'm going to use at this time, but as we can see up top, the domain name is available. So I'm going to add my account information, and I'll skip through the video just for a moment and blur out my info. And then we can choose the package plan or package information. So with Bluehost, because I know that I'm going to need it anyways, I go with the longest term, but if you just want to go with the cheapest amount overall, you can choose the 12-month plan. Then beneath that, we'll have the option to select some package extras. And the only thing that I recommend, depending on your situation, is the domain name privacy and protection. So every domain name that's online has to have something called whois contact information attached to it. It's kind of like if you have a piece of real estate, you have to have an owner's name and information attached to it. So if you want to keep your contact information private, I would choose to have the domain name privacy. That way, Bluehost's contact information will be what's public. But if you're using a business address or a PO box or something, you might not need to worry about that. So I'll leave that up to you. I'm going to elect to add the domain name privacy and then add my payment information, which I'll just blur out, and then select I've read and agreed to the terms of service and cancellation policy, which is a 30-day refund policy, I believe. And then I'm going to hit submit. Then once we're signed up, we're going to see that we have a confirmation email sent to us, as well as the option to download the receipt at the bottom of the page. And I'm going to hit create account. Then we'll come to a page where we create our account password attached to our domain name. So I have a password prepared already, and I'll select I've read and agreed to the terms, and then hit create account once more. Then it says our account is ready and we can log in. Then on the login page, we'll just need to add our password once more. And I'm going to hit save with Google Chrome. Then Bluehost is going to run us through a couple of questions here, which we can skip through or you can add your answers to, but it's not going to matter later on. So I'm going to skip through all of this, including the theme options. And the reason that Bluehost is showing all of this is because Bluehost is really popular for WordPress websites. In fact, WordPress themselves recommends Bluehost, so by default, Bluehost adds WordPress to the server for us when we sign up with an account. So to prepare our account for an HTML website instead of WordPress, we'll just need to take 2 simple steps, which I'm going to show you how to do. But before we do that, remember that you're going to have an email from Bluehost, which you'll need to check to verify your domain. So be sure to check for that and click the verification button. So now back on the Bluehost website, we're going to go down to the advanced link here, and I'm going to show you the first step to get rid of WordPress. So this is an optional step, but I would recommend doing it just so you know everything is cleared that was installed on the server for WordPress originally. And we're going to go into MySQL databases. Then once we're in MySQL databases, scroll down and hit delete on the database that you see, and then delete database. And this will delete the WordPress database that was installed automatically. Then we can go back to the advanced screen, and we're going to go to something called File Manager, where we'll delete the WordPress files and add our website files. So once you're here, click on the public_HTML folder right here. And then that's going to bring us into the directory of all of the files on our domain name. So I'm going to hit select all, so we can just delete all of the WordPress files that are here at once. And then go up to delete, then skip trash and permanently delete, then hit confirm, and now our directory is completely blank and ready for our website files. So go up and select the upload button. Then we'll be able to drag and drop our HTML files once we add them to a zip folder. So I'm going to use the agency theme from w3newbie.com, and I'm just going to select all the files, right click them, and then hit compress 10 items. So then we'll have our zip folder, and we can drag and drop this zip to Bluehost. So just give it a moment to upload, and then we'll go back to the file manager, and then we'll need to click the zip and then go up to extract and hit extract files and then hit close. And now all of our website files will be on our domain name. So in my case here, some files from my Mac somehow came along with the website file. So I'm just going to delete those and skip the trash. And we can also delete the zip archive that we created because we're not going to need that anymore. And now we're ready to check out our domain name with our website files on it. So I'm going to go up and add my drew-host.com URL. And then if we go to our website, it might be a little bit slow at first because the server space is still getting set up, but you should see your website files uploaded, and you can go over to different pages of the website. So for example, I'll just go to the Contact Us page with the contact form and the Google map. And then the last thing that I'm going to show you how to do is add an SSL certificate, which is the lock symbol next to our website. So that way our website has secure encryption with HTTPS instead of HTTP. So to see that we have the free SSL turned on, we can go to Marketplace on the left. Then once it brings us to the next page, we'll want to look for the add-ons link where it says shop add-ons, even though it's free. And then we'll scroll down to SSL certificates on the right. And then at the very top, we're going to see that auto SSL is on, as we can see right here, because it says it's on and we only have the option to disable it. So it might just take a little bit for the SSL to kick in, but just to make sure that it does, what I'm going to recommend is to simply contact Bluehost's chat support. So just click the question mark in the upper right hand corner, and this will bring us to the support page, and I'm going to select chat, and I'll show you how quickly we can get a rep chatting with us here. So I'm going to put in my name, Drew, and then my domain name, drew-host.com, then hit next, and I'll just select tech support and then SSL. Then I'm going to write, hello, I have an HTML website I would like SSL added to. Can you do that for me? Question mark. Then hit find help and start chat. And then we'll just go down and hit start chat again because we don't want to look at the article resources. Okay, so now we have somebody joined. And then we're going to need to verify our account via email. So just wait for it. And then we'll need to check our email for that verification code. So I'm going to pull that up, and there is my verification token. And I'll just prove that it's me by sending him the token, and then he'll be able to help me with it. And I'm not going to leave the whole chat here on video because it took a couple of minutes, but Bluehost has really great chat and phone reps, so I'm sure they'll be able to help you get the SSL set up. And once they do, you'll be able to go over to your domain name with the lock symbol and SSL added, as you can see here on the agency theme, which is uploaded to the domain name I signed up for, drewhost.com. So that does it for the entire tutorial or course. Be sure to check out the resources page at w3newbie.com, which will also teach you how to set up your domain name email address with Bluehost and connect it to your Gmail account so you can get your domain name email there. I want to thank you for watching. Please remember to check out the complete 12 website bundle pack at w3newbie.com, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.